Look, I'm going to be straight with you. Your parents didn't teach you this. Most therapists never learned this. And the majority of people will go their entire lives unconscious of these psychological forces controlling their decisions. Between 1907 and 1961, Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung documented patterns of human behavior that most people find too uncomfortable to acknowledge. He discovered that we all carry a shadow, repressed aspects of our personality that secretly drive our choices. He proved that we're attracted to people who embody our own unconscious, undeveloped traits. He showed that most of what we call personality is actually a social mask we've confused with our real identity. And here's what makes this dangerous knowledge. Jung demonstrated that these unconscious forces are more powerful than your conscious will. So, why didn't anyone teach you this? Because Jung's own mentor, Sigmund Freud, broke ties with him when Jung suggested that human behavior was driven by more than just sexual impulses. Because understanding your shadow means admitting you're capable of everything you judge in others. Because seeing through your persona means questioning everything you've built your identity around. Jung himself wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Translation: the people you hate are mirrors showing you parts of yourself you refuse to see. I'm about to prove that to you. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. Here's what they don't tell you about Carl Jung. He wasn't just some academic theorist sitting in an ivory tower. He was a man who nearly lost his mind, exploring the deepest, darkest corners of human psychology. Between 1913 and 1917, Jung experienced what he called his confrontation with the unconscious. For 4 years, he deliberately dove into his own psychosis. He saw visions, heard voices, and documented everything in what's now known as the Red Book. Most people would have been institutionalized. Jung turned it into the foundation of analytical psychology. Why does this matter? Because Jung didn't just study the unconscious, he lived it. He experienced firsthand how powerful these hidden forces really are. While Freud focused on sexual drives, Jung discovered something far more disturbing. We are all walking around with multiple personalities inside us. The person you think you are is just the tip of the iceberg. Jung identified what he called complexes, autonomous parts of your psyche that take over your behavior without your permission. Think you're in control of your reactions? Jung proved you're not. He documented the collective unconscious, inherited psychological patterns that influence your choices before you're even aware you're making them. He showed that what we call falling in love is actually psychological projection. You're not loving the person, you're loving the unconscious part of yourself you see reflected in them. And here's the kicker. Jung's work was largely ignored by mainstream psychology for decades because it was too threatening to our illusions of rational self-control. The man who mapped the human psyche more accurately than anyone before or since was dismissed as mystical and unscientific. Why? Because his discoveries were too dangerous to widely accept. If people truly understood how their unconscious mind works, they'd realize how much of their free will is actually unconscious programming. They'd see through the manipulation tactics that keep them compliant. They'd recognize that most of their problems aren't external. They're internal projections they refuse to own. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Today, I'm going to make 5 unconscious patterns conscious for you. And after this, you'll never be able to blame fate again. Here's the first truth your parents definitely didn't teach you. You are not a good person. Neither am I. Neither is anyone. Jung discovered what he called the shadow, the part of your personality you've been taught to deny, repress, and project onto others. Your shadow contains every impulse you've labeled as bad, your capacity for cruelty, manipulation, selfishness, and destruction. Most people spend their entire lives trying to prove they don't have a shadow. Big mistake. Jung wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, And the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. Here's what this looks like in real life. You know that person you absolutely can't stand, the one who just irritates you for no logical reason. That's your shadow staring back at you. The manipulative coworker you hate, you've got manipulation in your shadow. The narcissistic ex you despise, you've got narcissistic traits you refuse to acknowledge. The lazy friend who annoys you, you're projecting your own feared laziness. This isn't theory, this is psychological law. Jung proved that we hate in others what we refuse to see in ourselves. But here's where it gets dangerous. Your shadow doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It gets stronger. It starts controlling your behavior in ways you don't recognize. The nice guy who's actually passive-aggressive, his shadow is expressing his anger sideways because he can't admit he has anger. The woman who says she hates drama but somehow always ends up in the middle of it, her shadow is creating the chaos she consciously claims to avoid. The man who prides himself on being rational but makes terrible relationship decisions, his shadow contains all the emotion he's repressed. Here's what Jung understood that most people don't. Integration, not elimination. You don't get rid of your shadow, you integrate it consciously. When you acknowledge your capacity for manipulation, you stop being unconsciously manipulative. When you admit your potential for cruelty, you stop accidentally hurting people. When you own your selfishness, you can choose when to be selfish consciously instead of being selfish in ways that destroy your relationships. The most dangerous people are those who believe they have no shadow. They're unconsciously acting out their repressed darkness while maintaining their good person identity. The most powerful people are those who know their shadow intimately. They can use its energy consciously instead of being used by it unconsciously. Jung's warning. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Your shadow is your untapped power source, but only if you're brave enough to face it. Here's the second truth that will disturb you. You don't know who you are. The person you think you are, your personality, your values, your preferences, most of that is what Jung called the persona. It's a mask, a performance, a character you've been playing so long, you've forgotten it's not real. Jung wrote, "The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society. Fittingly enough, a kind of mask, designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and, on the other, to conceal the true nature of the individual." Let me show you how this plays out. You know that version of yourself at work, the professional, competent, always positive you? That's persona. The version of yourself around your family, the dutiful son, the responsible sibling, the one who has it all together, that's persona. The version of yourself on social media, the successful, happy, well-adjusted you, that's persona. None of these are lies, exactly, but none of them are the complete truth either. The problem starts when you confuse your persona with your identity, when you start believing your own performance. Jung observed that modern society rewards persona over authenticity. We promote the best performers, date the most attractive masks, and admire the most polished presentations. So we develop increasingly sophisticated personas, and we lose touch with who we actually are underneath. Here's the trap. The stronger your persona, the weaker your real personality becomes. You become so good at being what others expect that you forget what you actually want. You become so skilled at managing impressions that you lose access to your genuine impulses. You become so invested in maintaining your image that your real self starts to feel foreign and threatening. I see this everywhere. The successful businessman who can't relax because he doesn't know who he is without his achievement persona. The people pleaser who can't say no because her helpful persona has become her prison. The tough guy who can't show vulnerability because his strong persona won't allow it. The perfectionist who can't make mistakes because her competent persona demands flawlessness. Here's what Jung discovered. Persona inflation is epidemic. People become so identified with their mask that they panic when situations require them to drop it. They'd rather maintain their persona than pursue their actual goals. They'd rather be admired for who they're pretending to be than loved for who they actually are. But here's the real danger. When you live in your persona too long, your authentic self starts to emerge in destructive ways. The perfect family man has an affair. The selfless helper burns out and becomes bitter. The rational professional has an emotional breakdown. The strong leader becomes controlling and paranoid. Jung called this ananiodromia, the tendency for things to turn into their opposite when taken to extremes. Your persona always contains the seeds of its own destruction. The only way out is conscious integration. You need to know where your persona ends and your real self begins. You need to be able to put on the mask when it serves you and take it off when it doesn't. You need to develop what Jung called personality, the authentic self that exists independent of social approval. Jung's insight: the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But first, you have to stop being who you think you should be. Here's the third truth that will change how you see every relationship. You have never loved another person. You've only loved projections of your own unconscious. Jung discovered that what we call falling in love is actually psychological projection. We fall in love with parts of ourselves we see reflected in another person. Specifically, we fall in love with our anima or animus, the unconscious masculine or feminine aspects of our psyche. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But the reaction isn't random. It's completely predictable once you understand projection. Here's how it works. As men, we develop our conscious masculine traits: strength, logic, independence, competitiveness. But Jung showed that we all have an unconscious feminine side, what he called V, anima. This contains our capacity for emotion, intuition, receptivity, and nurturance. The less developed your anima, the more powerfully you'll project it onto women. You'll be irresistibly attracted to women who embody the feminine qualities you've repressed in yourself. The stoic man falls for the emotional woman. The rational man becomes obsessed with the intuitive woman. The independent man can't resist the dependent woman. For women, it's the reverse. The animus is their unconscious masculine side. The emotional woman falls for the logical man. The nurturing woman becomes fascinated by the ambitious man. The agreeable woman is drawn to the assertive man. Jung proved that attraction is unconscious compensation. You're not attracted to your type, you're attracted to your unlived life. Here's where it gets dangerous. Most people think love means finding someone who compliments you. Wrong. Real love means developing the qualities you're projecting onto your partner. Because projection always fails. That emotional woman you fell for? Eventually, you'll resent her emotionality because you refuse to develop your own. That strong man you attracted to? Eventually, you'll feel suffocated by his strength because you won't develop your own. Jung observed that the intensity of your initial attraction is directly proportional to the intensity of your eventual disappointment. The more powerfully you project, the more devastating the withdrawal of projection. This is why passionate relationships often become bitter. This is why people say love dies. It was never love. It was unconscious psychological hunger. You are trying to become whole through another person instead of doing the work yourself. Here's what Jung discovered about lasting relationships. They require both people to withdraw their projections and develop their own completeness. The man needs to develop his anima, his emotional intelligence, his intuition, his capacity for vulnerability. The woman needs to develop her animus, her assertiveness, her logic, her independence. When you stop projecting your unlived life onto your partner, you can finally see them as they actually are. And paradoxically, that's when real love becomes possible. Jung's insight: everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Your relationship problems aren't about finding the right person. They're about becoming the complete person. The person you're meant to be includes both your developed conscious traits and your undeveloped unconscious ones. Stop looking for your other half. Become whole. Here's the fourth truth that will shatter your illusion of self-control. You are not one person. You are multiple people. And most of the time, you're not the one in charge. Jung discovered what he called complexes, autonomous parts of your psyche that have their own agenda, their own personality, and their own ability to take over your behavior. These aren't metaphors. These are actual psychological subpersonalities that operate independently of your conscious will. Jung wrote, "Complexes are psychic fragments which have split off owing to traumatic influences or certain incompatible tendencies." Here's what this looks like in real life. You know that version of yourself that comes out when you're around your mother? The one that acts nothing like your adult self? That's a complex. You know how you become a completely different person when someone criticizes you? That's a complex taking over. You know that irrational jealousy that makes you act in ways you hate? That's a complex running the show. Most people think they have one consistent personality. Jung proved that's an illusion. We all have a mother complex, a father complex, and authority complex, and inferiority complex, and dozens of others. These complexes were formed during childhood when parts of your developing personality got frozen in time due to trauma, neglect, or overwhelming emotion. Here's the disturbing part. Your complexes have more power over your behavior than your conscious mind does. When a complex is activated, you literally become a different person. The successful CEO becomes a wounded child when his father criticizes him. The confident woman becomes insecure and needy when her abandonment complex is triggered. The rational man becomes rageful and primitive when his authority is challenged. Jung observed that people spend enormous amounts of energy pretending their complexes don't exist. They blame their reactions on external circumstances. My mother makes me crazy. My boss brings out the worst in me. My ex turned me into someone I didn't recognize. Wrong. Your external circumstances don't create your reactions. They activate complexes that were already there. The power of a complex is directly proportional to how unconscious it is. When you don't know you have a complex, it has complete control over you. When you recognize you have a complex, you can start to develop a relationship with it. Jung developed a technique called active imagination, consciously dialoguing with your complexes to understand their needs and integrate their energy. Here's what most people don't realize. Your complexes aren't problems to be solved. They're parts of yourself that need to be understood and integrated. Your mother complex contains not just your wounds, but also your capacity for nurturance. Your father complex contains not just your authority issues, but also your capacity for strength and direction. Your inferiority complex contains not just your insecurities, but also your drive for excellence and growth. The goal isn't to eliminate your complexes. It's to develop a conscious relationship with them, to recognize when they're active, and choose whether to let them run the show. Jung's insight: one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Your complexes are parts of your psyche that got stuck in the dark. Bringing them into consciousness doesn't make them disappear. It makes them allies instead of unconscious saboteurs. The most psychologically mature people aren't those without complexes. They're those who know their complexes intimately and can work with them consciously. Here's the fifth and final truth that will change everything. You were not born to fit in. You were born to become who you actually are. But society, family, and culture have spent your entire life programming you to be someone else. Jung called the process of becoming your authentic self individuation. And he warned that it's the most dangerous psychological journey you can take. Why dangerous? Because individuation requires you to disappoint everyone. Your family, who raised you to fulfill their unconscious needs. Your culture, which rewarded you for conforming to its values. Your peer group, which accepted you based on shared limitations. Your romantic partners, who fell in love with your potential to complete them. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he also warned, the individual has always had to struggle against being overwhelmed by the tribe. Here's what individuation actually requires. First, you must recognize that most of your personality is borrowed. Your values, your goals, your preferences. How much of this is actually yours versus what you absorbed from others? Most people never ask this question because the answer is terrifying. Second, you must be willing to disappoint people who invested in your false self. Your parents who expect you to live their unlived dreams. Your friends who bonded with you over shared complaints and limitations. Your partner who fell in love with your potential to be their missing piece. Third, you must develop a relationship with your unconscious. Your dreams, your fantasies, your spontaneous impulses. These contain information about who you actually are beneath your conditioning. Most people ignore their unconscious because it often contradicts their conscious identity. Fourth, you must integrate your shadow. You must own the parts of yourself you've been taught to deny. Your selfishness, your aggression, your capacity for destruction. These aren't bugs, they're features. They contain energy you need to become complete. Fifth, you must withdraw your projections. You must stop trying to become whole through other people and develop your own completeness. This is the hardest part, because it means taking responsibility for your own psychological development. Here's what Jung observed about individuation. Most people will do anything to avoid it. They'll stay in limiting relationships, dead-end jobs, and suffocating social groups, rather than face the unknown territory of their authentic self. They'll maintain their persona, feed their complexes, and live through projections because it feels safer than the uncertainty of individuation. But Jung also discovered something profound. The people who refuse to individuate don't get safety. They get neurosis. They get depression. They get addiction. They get physical illness. The psyche will not tolerate indefinite self-betrayal. If you don't consciously choose to become who you are, your unconscious will force the issue through crisis. Jung's insight. What you resist persists. The parts of yourself you refuse to develop don't disappear. They emerge as symptoms, sabotage, and suffering. The individuation process is not optional. The only choice is whether you do it consciously or unconsciously. 1. Whether you choose your authentic path or life forces it on you through breakdown. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Individuation is the process of making the unconscious conscious, of choosing your life instead of having it chosen for you, of becoming who you were meant to be instead of who you were programmed to be. It's the most difficult thing you'll ever do, and the only thing worth doing. Now here's the part that will make you uncomfortable. Everything I've just described to you, the shadow, the persona, projection, complexes, the resistance to individuation, you're doing all of it right now. You're sitting here judging other people for their unconscious patterns while remaining unconscious of your own. You're identifying with being the kind of person who gets psychology while maintaining your own psychological blind spots. You're probably thinking about someone in your life who needs to hear this instead of applying it to yourself. That's your ego defending itself. Jung understood that knowledge about psychology can become its own defense mechanism. You can study the unconscious without becoming conscious. You can analyze other people's shadows without facing your own. You can understand projection intellectually while continuing to project unconsciously. The most dangerous position is thinking you're above these patterns because you can recognize them in others. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. That includes accepting that you have a shadow you haven't fully faced. That your persona is still running more of your life than you want to admit. That you're still projecting unconscious parts of yourself onto others. That complexes are still hijacking your behavior in ways you don't recognize. That you're still resisting aspects of your individuation because they're too threatening to your current identity." Here's what separates psychological maturity from psychological knowledge. Mature people use psychological insights to examine themselves. Immature people use psychological insights to judge others. Mature people ask, "How is this pattern showing up in my life?" Immature people ask, "Why doesn't everyone else understand this?" The test of whether you really understand Jung's work isn't whether you can explain it. It's whether you can apply it to yourself without defending, justifying, or deflecting. Can you admit that you have unconscious motivations you don't understand? Can you recognize that people you dislike are probably reflecting your disowned shadow? Can you see that your attractions are often projections of your undeveloped potential? Can you acknowledge that you have complexes that sometimes take over your behavior? Can you admit that you're still avoiding aspects of your authentic self because they threaten your current identity? If you can honestly answer yes to these questions, you're ready for the real work. If you're defending against them, you're proving Jung's point. The unconscious will remain unconscious until you're ready to make it conscious. And that readiness can't be forced or faked. It comes when the pain of staying unconscious becomes greater than the fear of becoming conscious.
But here's what Jung never fully warned people about. What happens when you do this work while everyone around you is still trapped in their unconscious? What happens when you become the mirror that reflects back everyone else's shadow?
Carl Jung often returned to one haunting observation. Those who walk in truth become mirrors, and mirrors are rarely welcome. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the shift before you even spoke? The conversations that pause mid-sentence, the smiles that don't reach the eyes, the sudden defensiveness from people who barely know you. You're not imagining it. Neuroscience has proven that when you enter a space, others' brains unconsciously mirror your emotional state through specialized neurons. But what happens when your inner world is more developed than theirs? What happens when your presence carries the weight of someone who has faced their shadows while they're still hiding from theirs? Carl Jung spent decades studying this phenomenon, the way authentic individuals unconsciously trigger what he called shadow projection in others. Your presence becomes a mirror, reflecting back everything they've refused to acknowledge about themselves. And that makes you dangerous. Not because you're trying to harm anyone, but because you represent what they could become if they had the courage to look within. Before we dive into Jung's psychology, let's understand what's happening in the brain. When you walk into a room, something remarkable occurs beneath the level of consciousness. Mirror neurons, specialized brain cells discovered in the 1990s, fire both when you feel an emotion and when others observe you feeling it. Research shows that emotional contagion is real. Your calm literally activates their calm. Your authenticity challenges their masks. Your depth exposes their surface-level existence. But here's what makes this unsettling. Most people aren't ready for that level of honesty. Jung called this individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming whole by integrating both light and shadow aspects of yourself. When you've walked this path, even partially, your presence carries a different frequency. You radiate what Jung termed psychological integration, and it's felt before you speak a word. Carl Jung discovered something that explains why your presence triggers such strong reactions. We don't just see others, we see ourselves reflected in them. When someone has done inner work, faced their fears, embraced their contradictions, they become what Jung called a living symbol of possibility. Your very existence whispers to others unconscious. This is what wholeness looks like. But for those still trapped in what Jung termed persona living, the false masks we wear to survive society, your authenticity feels like an accusation. Your silence becomes judgment. Your self-respect becomes arrogance. Your boundaries become coldness. This isn't about you. It's about what you represent. You've become someone else's mirror, and not everyone is ready to see their reflection. The 13 signs we'll explore today aren't flaws in your character. They're evidence of your growth, and evidence of others' resistance to their own. You've experienced this countless times. You're in a group conversation, listening deeply, saying little. Not because you're shy or disengaged, but because you're actually present, absorbing, processing, feeling the undercurrents that others miss. But your silence makes them uncomfortable. They start filling the space with nervous laughter, unnecessary explanations, where they begin talking at you instead of with you. Research shows that mirror neurons fire not just during action, but during purposeful inaction. When you're silent with intention, truly listening rather than waiting to speak, others' brains register this as a completely different frequency than empty silence. Jung wrote about what he called active listening as a form of psychological containment. When you hold space without trying to fix, advise, or fill silence, you create what he termed a temenos, a sacred psychological container where truth can emerge. Their discomfort with your silence reveals their discomfort with depth. People who fill every pause with noise are often running from their own inner voice. Your stillness forces them to hear what they've been avoiding. Notice when your silence triggers others. Instead of feeling obligated to speak, ask yourself, what are they trying not to hear right now? Your silence isn't emptiness, it's presence. And presence is what the world is starving for. It happens everywhere. Coffee shops, elevators, waiting rooms. Strangers start telling you about their divorce, their childhood trauma, their secret fears. Friends call you when their world is falling apart. You become everyone's emotional safe house. But here's what's strange. You didn't ask for these confessions. You weren't fishing for personal information. You were just being yourself. Neuroscientist research on oxytocin and mirror neurons shows that when someone feels psychologically safe, their brain releases bonding hormones that make disclosure feel natural, even necessary. Your nervous system regulation literally helps regulate theirs. Jung observed this in his practice and called it the analyst's paradox. The more integrated you become, the more you unconsciously invite others' shadow material to surface. You become what he termed a vessel for the collective unconscious. Not by trying, but by being whole enough to hold others' brokenness without breaking. People confess to you because you don't judge. You've learned to hold your own contradictions. They're drawn to your lack of moral superiority because deep down, they're exhausted from pretending to be perfect. Set boundaries around emotional labor. Just because you can hold others' pain doesn't mean you should carry it. Ask yourself, am I healing with them or healing for them? The former is healthy. The latter leads to burnout. You walk into a meeting, job interview, or social hierarchy, and something shifts. The person in charge becomes defensive. They start over-explaining their position, questioning your qualifications, or dismissing your input before you've barely spoken. You're not challenging them directly. You're not being confrontational. But your presence itself feels like a challenge to their authority. Research on dominance hierarchies shows that authentic confidence, what psychologists call quiet confidence, activates threat responses in those whose authority depends on others' insecurity. Your nervous system stability literally destabilizes their power dynamics. Jung wrote extensively about what he called natural authority versus positional authority. Those who have done inner work carry what he termed the authority of the self, an inner sovereignty that doesn't need external validation. This threatens anyone whose identity depends on being above others. Their intimidation reveals that their authority is constructed, not earned. True leaders aren't threatened by authentic people, they're drawn to them. Only those leading from insecurity feel challenged by your inner stability. Don't shrink to make insecure leaders comfortable. Your authenticity isn't arrogance, it's medicine for toxic power structures. Ask yourself, am I being genuinely respectful, or am I performing submission? Choose respect over performance. Weather conversations, celebrity gossip, surface-level work updates. You try to engage, you smile and nod, but something inside you starts to wither. Your energy doesn't just drop, it feels actively drained, as if something essential is being pulled from your core. You leave these interactions feeling more lonely than if you'd been alone. Neuroscience research shows that meaningful conversation activates the brain's reward centers and releases connection hormones like oxytocin. Surface-level interaction, by contrast, activates stress responses because your nervous system recognizes the disconnection, even when your mind tries to rationalize it. Jung believed that the psyche has an innate drive toward meaning, what he called the transcendent function. When you engage in meaningless exchange, you're literally working against your psychological nature. Your soul recognizes the absence of soul in the conversation. People who only engage in small talk are often protecting themselves from deeper intimacy. They've learned that surface level is safer than soul level. Your discomfort reveals that you've outgrown the safety of superficiality. Don't force depth where it's not welcomed, but don't force yourself to stay shallow. Practice saying, I tend to connect through deeper conversations. What's really going on with you? You'll be surprised how many people are waiting for someone to ask. It's uncanny how it happens. The nervous dog in the corner comes directly to you. Children who are shy with adults light up in your presence. Even wild animals seem less afraid, more curious than cautious. You're not trying to attract them. You're not using treats or tricks. Something about your energy feels safe to beings who rely purely on instinct. Research shows that animals and children read nervous system states through micro-expressions, pheromones, and electromagnetic fields that adults learn to mask. Mirror neurons in both animals and children are hypersensitive to authentic versus performed emotions. Jung believed that children and animals exist closer to what he called the natural self, unfiltered by social conditioning. They respond to your energy because individuation brings you closer to your own natural state. You've stripped away enough artifice that they recognize something real. When adults comment on how animals and children love you, there's often a note of surprise or even envy. They're witnessing something they've lost, the ability to recognize and trust authentic presence. Your natural magnetism reminds them of what they've buried under layers of social adaptation. Pay attention to how animals and children respond to you, but also notice your response to them. Their unconditional acceptance can teach you to accept parts of yourself you still judge. What do they see in you that you struggle to see in yourself? You step into a room, and within seconds, you know. The couple who just fought, the underlying tension in the family dinner, the artificial cheerfulness masking disappointment at the office meeting. Others seem oblivious, chatting and laughing, but you feel it all. The unspoken resentments, the hidden grief, the carefully maintained illusions. Neuroscientists have discovered that highly sensitive individuals have more active mirror neuron systems and heightened activity in brain regions processing emotional and social information. Your nervous system literally functions as an emotional antenna, picking up micro-signals others miss. Jung called this unconscious perception, the psyche's ability to sense what lies beneath surface presentations. He believed that those who have integrated their own unconscious material develop heightened sensitivity to unconscious material in others and environments. When you mention sensing weird energy in a space, and others dismiss it, they're protecting themselves from feeling too much. Your emotional attunement threatens their carefully constructed emotional walls. They need those walls. You've learned to live without them. Learn to distinguish between what's yours and what belongs to the environment. Before entering social spaces, ground yourself. What am I feeling right now? Then notice what shifts. You're not responsible for healing every emotional wound you sense. They call you arrogant when you're confident, selfish when you have boundaries, too sensitive when you feel deeply. The accusations don't match your intentions or actions, but they're delivered with such conviction that you start questioning yourself. You've become a screen for others to project everything they can't accept about themselves. Neuroscience research on defense mechanisms shows that projection activates when the brain encounters traits in others that trigger shame about similar traits in ourselves. The unconscious mind literally attributes internal conflicts to external targets to protect the ego from discomfort. Jung identified projection as one of the primary ways people avoid confronting their shadow, the parts of themselves they've rejected or repressed. When you embody qualities they've disowned, confidence, sensitivity, boundaries, their unconscious launches these qualities back at you as criticisms. Their projections are actually confessions. When someone calls you too much, they're revealing their fear of being too much. When they label your boundaries as selfish, they're showing their own struggle with self-care. You're carrying the disowned parts of their psyche. When faced with projection, ask, what part of themselves are they seeing in me that they can't accept? This isn't about taking responsibility for their healing, but understanding the psychological dynamics so you don't internalize their disowned shadows. You've learned to say no without elaborate justifications. You choose authenticity over approval. You've stopped performing happiness when you're not happy. This freedom, quiet, undramatic, but unmistakable, triggers something primal in those still trapped by others' expectations. They call you selfish, unrealistic, or going through a phase, but their irritation reveals the truth. Your liberation reminds them of their own cage. Research on social conformity shows that when group members witness someone breaking social rules without consequences, it creates cognitive dissonance. Their brains must either acknowledge their own conformity choices or dismiss the rule breaker to maintain psychological comfort. Jung wrote about individuation as inherently threatening to the collective. When you stop living by unconscious social contracts, performing happiness, prioritizing others' comfort over your truth, you become what he called a reminder of unlived life to those still choosing safety over authenticity. Their irritation with your freedom reveals the price they believe they're paying for belonging. They've traded pieces of themselves for acceptance, and your wholeness highlights their fragmentation. Your freedom exposes their voluntary imprisonment. Don't shrink your freedom to make others comfortable, but don't flaunt it either. Your liberation serves the collective by showing what's possible. Ask, how can I live my truth without making it a judgment of their choices? Your freedom is medicine, not a weapon. You're sitting quietly, minding your own business, when suddenly someone snaps at you, or breaks down crying, or becomes inexplicably angry. You didn't say anything provocative. You weren't being judgmental. You were just there. But your presence alone was enough to crack open whatever they'd been suppressing. Neuroscience research shows that when people encounter someone with regulated nervous system functioning, it can trigger what psychologists call emotional flooding in those with unresolved trauma or suppressed emotions. Your stability becomes a catalyst for their instability to surface. Jung observed that integrated individuals often become containers for projections of others' unconscious material. Your psychological wholeness creates a safe enough space for repressed emotions to emerge, even when neither of you consciously intends it. Their sudden emotional reactions aren't about you, they're about what you represent. Your emotional regulation reminds their psyche that it's safe to feel what they've been avoiding. You've become an unconscious invitation to authentic emotion. When someone has an unexpected emotional reaction around you, resist the urge to fix or take responsibility. Instead, hold space without absorbing their emotions. Ask, what might they need to feel right now that they've been denying themselves? There's rarely middle ground with you. People meet you and within minutes, they're either drawn to you like you're exactly what they've been searching for, or they're repelled as if you're everything they fear about themselves. You rarely get neutral reactions. You're either someone's favorite person or their inexplicable nemesis. Research on first impressions shows that people with high emotional authenticity trigger immediate limbic system responses, the brain's ancient fight-or-flight mechanism. Your realness bypasses social filters and speaks directly to others' unconscious, creating instant attraction or rejection. Jung wrote about what he called archetypal activation, when someone embodies qualities that either inspire or threaten others' deepest psychological patterns. You've become what he termed a living symbol, representing either possibility or judgment to different people. Love at first sight responses reveal their hunger for authentic connection. Immediate dislike reveals their fear of being truly seen. Both reactions say more about their internal landscape than about you. You're simply the screen onto which they project their relationship with authenticity itself. Stop trying to be universally liked. Your polarizing effect is evidence of your realness, not a flaw to fix. Ask, am I being true to myself, or am I performing to manage others' reactions? Choose truth over approval, always. They're performing happiness, but you feel their sadness. They're displaying confidence, but you sense their terror. They're acting busy and important, but you recognize their emptiness. You don't mean to see through their acts. It's not conscious analysis. You just feel the discrepancy between what they're showing and what they're actually experiencing. And somehow, they know that you know. Neuroscientist research on microexpressions and incongruent communication shows that people with integrated emotional systems can detect misalignment between verbal and nonverbal cues up to 500 times faster than the conscious mind can process them. Jung believed that confronting your own shadow, your rejected and hidden aspects, develops what he called psychological discrimination. When you've stopped performing your own false selves, you naturally recognize performance in others. Their discomfort around you reveals how much energy they spend maintaining facades. Your ability to see through performance threatens the carefully constructed image they believe they need to survive. You represent the terrifying possibility of being seen completely. Use your insight compassionately. Remember that most people perform because they believe their authentic selves aren't acceptable. Ask, how can I honor what I see without making them feel exposed? Your perception is a gift. Use it to understand, not to judge. You're listening with genuine curiosity, but they become defensive. You're offering honest feedback, but they hear criticism. You're simply being present, but they feel scrutinized. The judgment they feel isn't coming from you, it's coming from within themselves. But your presence amplifies their own inner critic until it becomes unbearable. Research on shame and self-criticism shows that when people encounter someone who embodies self-acceptance, it can trigger intense awareness of their own self-judgment. Neurons make them feel your self-compassion, which highlights their self-criticism. Jung wrote about the projection of the inner judge, how people who haven't made peace with their own inner critic will experience others' presence as judgmental. Your self-acceptance becomes a mirror for their self-rejection. When they feel judged by your non-judgmental presence, they're revealing the harshness of their relationship with themselves. You're not judging them, you're just not joining them in judging themselves. And that feels foreign and threatening. When someone accuses you of judgment you're not feeling, respond with curiosity rather than defense. I'm not feeling judgmental. What might you be feeling about yourself right now? Help them recognize the source of the judgment they're experiencing. This is the sign that encompasses all others. Your years of therapy, shadow work, meditation, and self-reflection haven't just changed how you think. They've changed how you exist in the world. The peace you've made with your darkness, the boundaries you've learned to maintain, the authenticity you've fought to embody. All of it radiates outward as presence. People feel it before they understand it. Your inner work has become your outer aura. Neuroscience research on neuroplasticity shows that sustained inner work literally rewires the brain, changing everything from stress responses to social cognition. These changes affect posture, micro-expressions, vocal tonality, and electromagnetic field patterns that others unconsciously detect. Jung called this individuation made visible, when the inner journey toward wholeness becomes an outer radiance. He believed that people who have integrated their shadows naturally emanate what he termed psychological authenticity, that others can sense but not always name. When people react strongly to your presence, they're responding to evidence that psychological transformation is possible. For some, this is inspiring. For others, it's threatening, because it challenges their belief that this is just how I am. Honor the journey that brought you here. Your presence isn't an accident. It's the result of conscious choice to face yourself completely. Ask, how can I embody my growth without making others feel diminished by their own journey? Your evolution serves the collective, even when it triggers individual resistance. But before we conclude, let's address the shadow side of having a powerful presence. Because there's a difference between integrated authenticity and spiritual bypassing, between healthy boundaries and emotional unavailability, between seeing clearly and becoming judgmental. If you recognize these signs but find yourself feeling superior to others, you've missed the point. If you use your insight to manipulate or control, you've weaponized your growth. True individuation includes humility. Real presence includes compassion for those still finding their way. Jung warned about inflation, becoming identified with your own development in ways that separate you from humanity rather than connecting you more deeply to it. Your powerful presence is not a badge of superiority. It's a responsibility to model what's possible while honoring others' timelines for awakening. If you've recognized yourself in these 13 signs, you're part of a rare group. You've walked the difficult path that Jung described, integrating your shadows and learning to live without masks. Your presence unsettles others, not because you're broken, but because you represent what they could become if they had the courage to face themselves completely. But here's the deeper question. Why do you have this kind of powerful presence in the first place? What creates the psychological makeup that allows you to see through facades while others remain on the surface? The answer lies in understanding what Carl Jung called the most psychologically dangerous personality type to possess. Not dangerous to others, dangerous to yourself. If you've ever felt like you're living in two realities, if you've questioned your sanity because of overwhelming insights, if you've learned to stay silent about what you see because sharing it leads to isolation, then you might be what Jung considered the most complex type to navigate. Understanding this isn't just interesting, it's essential for your psychological survival. Because Jung discovered 3 specific traps that can transform your greatest gift into profound suffering, and the integration process that transforms your curse back into a gift. Watch the hidden curse of being an intuitive introvert next to understand the deeper psychology behind your powerful presence. Because knowing how you affect others is only meaningful when you first understand why.